Hi, my name is Dan and I make competitive Warhammer 40k content. Today we're going to be talking about how to choose secondaries. Secondary objectives are incredibly important in Warhammer 40k. If you choose the wrong secondaries, you can set yourself up to lose before you even deploy. So today we're going to be going over some secondaries for beginners. We're going to be talking about what makes a secondary good, how we can leverage data and expertise from others to pick secondaries, how we can design a list around secondaries, and how we can analyze the mission and opponent to pick secondaries that align with our goals. Now, in case there are beginners out there, we're just going to go over a quick review of secondaries. So there are 5 different categories that secondaries fall under. These are Battlefield Supremacy, No Mercy Nor Spite, Purge the Enemy, Warcraft, and Shadow Operations. There are 3 to 4 secondaries that fall in these categories. Let me just move these up here so we get a little more room. In every game of Warhammer 40k, you will choose 3 of these secondaries. They can score up to a max of 45 points out of the total 100 points in your game. They are incredibly important, and I would argue that most games come down to who can score the most secondary points. All armies with an up-to-date 9th edition codex also have faction-specific secondaries. So for example, if you are Space Marines, you have access to Shock Tactics, Oath of Moments, and Codex Warfare as well. And even further, if you have a supplement of one of those factions, such as Blood Angels, you have access to even more secondaries. So as a Blood Angels player, I also have access to Relentless Assault, Fury of the Lost, Death from Above, and Blade of Sanguinius. But you can't just choose any 3 secondaries you want. You can only choose 1 from a specific category, and you can't choose any of the faction or chapter-specific secondaries more than once. So for example, I cannot choose Shock Tactics and Oath of Moments because they're both from the Space Marine Codex. However, I can choose Relentless Assault, Oath of Moments, and Assassination. There are also 9 different missions you can play in an incursion match of Warhammer 40k. Each of these has their own mission-specific secondary you can also choose. Some of those are really good, and some of those are really, really bad. They don't fall into any of these categories. Now you may be asking yourself, what makes a secondary good? Well, one of the things we can think about is an extreme example of what a good secondary would be, right? It would be 15 points that your opponent couldn't stop and you didn't have to do anything to do. So kind of like a Dark Angel's Stubborn Defiance. Yeah, you guys have had it too good for too long, and I'm going to call you out on it. But okay, being a little more serious, there are 5 different categories that I would say that a good secondary should have. It should be consistent. You should reliably be able to get a specific amount of points on that secondary. If sometimes it gets you 4 points and sometimes it gets you 15 points, it might just be a win more secondary that's good when you're going to win already and bad when you're already going to lose. And that's not the type of secondary we really want. The next is things that have high max scores. You'll see that some secondaries can score all the way up to 15 and some are capped even lower, all the way down to 4 points. And we want to avoid some of those low max scores. Next one is to avoid secondaries that your opponents can easily counterplay. A third quality of a good secondary would be one that your opponents can't counterplay against. I put asterisks over there because, of course, every secondary has some counterplay, but as little as possible is best. Number 4 is overlapping with other secondaries. One of my favorite sayings is that you want to feed 2 birds with 1 scone, or in this case, score 2 secondaries with 1 unit. And then finally, number 5, it should be easily achievable with the mission you're playing. You'll see that different missions will either make secondaries easier or harder to score, and you want ones that are in line with your mission. So now we've come up with 5 qualities of a good secondary. What we can do is change these into questions and then use these questions to ask other secondaries to figure out if they are good or not. It's very hard to just look at something and say, is this good or not, with no context. So whenever I'm approaching a problem, I like to think of what right looks like and then how other things fit into that idealized answer. It can be very hard to analyze things in a vacuum. So I like the idea of these questions as a scorecard that I would compare against secondaries. So how reliable is this secondary? One example of something that isn't reliable is minimize losses. This is a mission-specific secondary where you score 15 points if you have 75% of your army at the end of the game, and all the way down to 5 victory points if you have less than 25% of your army. This is a great example of a secondary that if you're maxing it out, you are probably already going to win. If you're at less than 25% of your army's starting strength, you're probably already going to lose. So I would argue that minimize losses is not a reliable secondary. Next question we can ask is, can the max score help me win? Seems kind of silly because obviously getting a max score would be good, right? But Titan Hunter, you can score a max of only 4 points if your opponent has one Titanic model. So even if you're playing against someone who has, let's say, Mortarion, and you agree that if I kill Mortarion, that's going to be my best shot of winning, so it's in line with your game plan, but if all it does is give you 4 points, then that's actually not going to be very helpful in the long run. So you have to look at how the max score of that secondary against your opponent can help you win. The third is how easily can my opponent counter this? A great example of this is Pierce the Veil. So for Pierce the Veil, you have to have one of your Psychers, get to within 6 inches of your opponent's battlefield edge, cast Pierce the Veil with a warp charge of 4, giving up all their other psychic actions, and then if you do that 4 times, you'll score 15 points. It's also worth noting that if you cast it at least 2 times, you'll score 8 points, but that's really not where you want to be. You can think of secondaries like Pierce the Veil as a bunch of chains put together, and all your opponent has to do is break one of those chains for you to not be able to score it. So for Pierce the Veil, your Psyker, that one same Psyker, has to be alive. It has to get within 6 inches of your opponent's edge. It has to be able to cast the Pierce the Veil successfully. It's only a warp charge 4, but you could still mess it up. And your opponent has to not be able to deny it. So there's all these different places where your opponent could stop you. They could just try to kill your Psyker. They could prevent you from getting closer. Or they could just use a stratagem that's like a 4-up deny automatically. These are the type of things that gives your opponents counterplay. Now, counterplay is a great piece of game design, but we're not here to play interesting secondaries that give your opponents counterplay. We're here to win. And then number 4 is, does this overlap with my other secondaries? So one example of overlapping secondaries is engage on all fronts and retrieve Octaria's data. So engage on all fronts gets you points every turn if you have different units in all the different table quarters. And retrieve Octaria's data gets you points by doing actions in different table quarters. So you can imagine having a unit come out of Deep Strike in one of your opponent's backfield quarters and do an action. You're using that unit to score both retrieve Octaria's data and engage on all fronts. And the final one is, does the mission make this secondary easier? Raise the banners high gives you a point at the end of every turn for every banner you have raised. You raise a banner by doing an action on an objective. So immediately, a mission with 4 objectives is going to be harder to score raise the banners high than a mission with 6 objectives. And kind of the takeaway from that is that the value of a secondary is based on your army, your opponent's army, and what the mission facilitates. People want to be able to pick 3 secondaries that fit exactly in the middle of this Venn diagram, but that's just not really the case. What usually happens in your game is you'll have one good secondary, one medium secondary, and one kind of suspicious secondary. And we can describe what these little overlapping parts are. If your faction has a capability to do something, and it's one of your opponent's weaknesses, that would be something like a kill secondary. Your opponent has Titans, and you have the ability to kill them, boom, kill secondary. If your faction has a certain capability, and the mission enables it, it might not be one of your opponent's weaknesses, and it opens it up to counterplay, but it's still a good secondary. One of the most interesting categories, I think, is a combination of your opponent's weakness and things that the mission enables. I think one kind of good example of that would be something like Abhor the Witch against an army like Thousand Suns. If your faction has a Psyker that's really kind of critical to its game plan, then you can't take Abhor the Witch even if it's really good against your opponent and the terrain and mission really allows you to capitalize on it. And then finally, in the middle there, you have your ideal choices. So all your secondaries will exist somewhere on the spectrum. Now, some people are probably going to call me a sheep for this, but I believe in leveraging outside expertise when I make decisions. I truly believe there are very few problems in the world that are unique to one person. Whether it's relationship advice, how to bake a cake, how to paint a model, or even Warhammer 40k, somebody has dealt with the same problem as you and has probably made a YouTube video or written an article about it. We should be standing on the shoulders of giants and learning from people who've done the hard work for us. You don't need to do all the analysis yourself because there are so many smart people out there who've done a lot of work for us. So one of the quotes I'd like to share with you, though, is from Aristotle. And he said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." I mean, let's face it. Anybody can do what I did, get a microphone and a camera and just put content on YouTube. It doesn't make me any good or any knowledgeable about this game. So I encourage you to listen to what other people say, but have a healthy dose of skepticism in trying to analyze why they think that's a certain way. Okay, so this graphic I have on the left comes from goonhammer.com from one of their Meta Watch articles about a month and a half ago. The data itself came from ITC Battles app. Goonhammer.com is the highest quality Warhammer 40k written content on the web, in my opinion. I will link this article below, and I highly recommend you guys read their articles, as well as this one specifically, because it goes more in depth on meta than I do in this video, but still finish my video first. Okay, so what this graphic shows is how often different secondaries were picked, as well as the average victory points scored for each of those different secondaries. So you can see on the top, Titan Hunter scored an average of 9.1 VP per game, and Deploy Teleport Homers scored an average of 4.3 victory points. Okay, so we can clearly see what the three highest scoring secondaries are. Should I just pick Titan Hunter, Stranglehold, and behind enemy lines every game and hope to win because I've chosen the highest average VP scores? No, of course not. Now let's look at why that isn't the right way of thinking though. And I'd like to share with you a story from a book called How Not to Be Wrong, The Power of Mathematical Thinking. Now this is one of my favorite books. It has a pretty clickbaity title, but it's actually quite a good book. One of the stories that the author talks about is World War II planes. What happened was engineers in World War II were trying to figure out how to make their planes more survivable. So what they did is they looked at where all the bullet holes were on the planes that came back after missions. And what they found was almost all the bullet holes were all along the wings, the tail, and the center of the plane. There was almost nothing on the engine or cockpit. So one of the conclusions they came up with, because they wanted to keep the weight of the plane the same, is to take armoring from the front of the plane and put it on the wings, because that's where all the bullets were hitting. And of course that's not a very good conclusion, because what would happen is if a plane got hit in their cockpit or their engine with bullets, that they would go down and never come back. So the engineers were only looking at planes that had done a mission and come back. And this is called survivorship bias. And this is present in secondaries too. Titan Hunter gives you victory points if you kill your opponent's Titanic models. If they don't have any Titanic models, you cannot score Titan Hunter. So people only chose that secondary when they thought it was good. So it's important that as we're looking through this data, we understand that people would only choose secondaries if they thought they would get a good score on it. So there is definitely survivorship bias in these secondaries. I'd also encourage you to look at how often some of these secondaries are picked. You can see that Engage on All Fronts and Retrieve Octarius data are by far the most chosen secondaries, and we'll talk about why that is a little bit later. Another one of my favorite books is The Psychology of Intelligence Analysis by Richard J. Heuer. And this is actually where the idea of heuristics comes from, is his books and his writings. I highly recommend you guys read these two books if you're interested in understanding why we think the way we think and some of the different fallacies our minds create for us. I have links for both of these below with an Amazon affiliate link as well as an Audible link if you prefer that as well. On that Goonhammer article, they also talked about all the faction-specific secondaries that were available at this time. One of the things that you can see is that for Dark Angels, Stubborn Defiance was taken 60% of the time by Dark Angels players and scored an average of 10.4 victory points per game. This is what I mean by leveraging expertise. A lot of people out there don't really know how to vector their list to line up with different secondaries or where they should even start thinking. But if you use an article like this one from Goonhammer, you can see that Stubborn Defiance, the highest percentage picked secondary in the entire game, and has one of the highest average victory points scored. And if you're not at least considering Stubborn Defiance, you're wrong. I'm not saying it should be chosen in 100% of games, but if you're lost on where to go, this type of data is incredibly important for you. Now let's look at another faction, Blood Angels. You can see that the most picked secondary for them is Relentless Assault, and it scores an average of 9.4 victory points. Now, Stubborn Defiance gives you points by just having OBSEC units on a backfield objective. So basically there's very little effort you have to put into actually scoring that secondary. Relentless Assault gives you 4 VP at the end of your turn if you have more models in your opponent's deployment zone than they have in yours. So by looking at this data, I can see that Blood Angels have had success with Relentless Assault, take it pretty often, and score pretty well with it. So knowing that Blood Angels have success with this secondary, I should be thinking, how can I design my list around secondaries? Because my faction, Blood Angels, has access to a good secondary and models that complement that secondary. And if you want to talk with more like-minded individuals and support my content, I have a link to Patreon below. No matter what you decide to support me with, you'll get access to my YouTube videos 24 hours early, credits in my YouTube videos, as well as be able to vote on video topics, all the way up to getting your own monthly high-quality MS Paint drawings of your choice. Obviously, no weird stuff. I'm not drawing your weird Emperor Sanguinius fanfiction. No thank you. Also, everyone will get access to our Discord. We'll be talking about strategy and overall working to help each other out. I'm hoping to do some weekly hangouts where we can all just hang out in Discord, hobby together, and talk about the game. Every single week for the past 3 months, I've created a new Yahoo email in order to get a free trial for video editing software. So supporting the channel will help me get better equipment as well as better video editing software so I can make higher quality content for all of you guys. I'd love to start doing some live streams too and Q&As if you guys are interested in that. But please don't feel any pressure. You guys have been incredibly supportive. Currently, my YouTube stats for engagement, like comments and likes, are almost 3 times higher than the YouTube average. So simple likes and comments truly help me, and I truly appreciate the support. So as a Blood Angels player, I have access to 24 different secondaries, and it can be incredibly hard to try to analyze all 24 of these secondaries based on all the different conditions that can exist in a game. But Richard Hewer writes about how to solve these problems in his book, The Psychology of Intelligence Analysis. One of the experiments he ran was on horse betting, and basically he would give people different pieces of information ranging from the horse's last race time all the way down to the type of food they ate. But Richard Hewer had a very interesting finding in his experiment. He found that the more information he gave the people, the more confident they were in their results, but also the less accurate they were in their results. And so what I'd like to do is try to cut away all this chaff and focus on just a couple very important pieces of information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove every single secondary that either scores low, is dependent on my opponent's army, or is dependent on the mission I'm playing on. And what you'll see is that I'm able to eliminate a vast majority of the secondaries. Additionally, behind enemy lines is basically a worse version of Relentless Assault for Blood Angels, so I'll remove that too. So you can see that I started with 24 secondaries, but I've narrowed it down to only 5. And you can see that if I wasn't a Blood Angels player and didn't have access to Relentless Assault or Oath of Moments, I would be really drawn to retrieve Octarius data and engage on all fronts. Both of those secondaries are agnostic of the mission or my opponent, and they don't require any list building requirements like To the Last does. Now we can understand why all that data from before showed us that engage on all fronts and retrieve Octarius data are by far the most chosen secondaries. And now what I'll do is I'll look at the average scores for all these secondaries and choose one from each category that has the highest average score. And what you'll see that I'm left with is Relentless Assault, Oath of Moments, and Retrieve Octarius data. So now I have a baseline. As a Blood Angels player, I should be trying to go for Relentless Assault, Oath of Moments, and Retrieve Octarius data in a vacuum. And this is how I make a take-all-comers list. I don't know if my opponent's going to play all Titans. I don't know if they're going to have 300 boys. But what I do know is that no matter what, I have 3 decent secondaries that I can choose from. So I won't go too much into the specifics of this because I already made a video on how to create competitive army lists around your secondaries. So I'll link that above, and I will just say briefly that Relentless Assault involves getting to your opponent's deployment zone, retrieve Octarius data, its actions on 4 quarters of the map, and Oath of Moments is kind of split half and half the points from standing in the middle, and half the points from basically just existing by killing enemy vehicles, characters, or not retreating. So Relentless Assault and Retrieve Octarius data can both be done by fast-moving troops or troops that can come out of Deep Strike, which Blood Angels can really capitalize on. So going into a game, I start with these 3 secondaries unless something can push me elsewhere. But we want to be able to modify it based on the opponent we're playing against and the mission we're playing on. So now, instead of looking at 25 different secondaries every time we come into a game, all we have to do is look at the mission and our opponent and ask ourselves, do they give me the option to take a secondary that is better than one of the ones I already have? So for example, on this map, we have 5 different objectives, and one of the objectives is on the center of the battlefield. Now this map pushes me towards something like Stranglehold. Stranglehold gives you 3 points a turn if you hold the majority of objectives. So it's pretty easy to understand that on a 4 objective map, you would need to hold 3 objectives. On a 5 objective map, you also need to hold 3 objectives. But on a 6 objective map, you need to hold 4 objectives. So Stranglehold is actually much better on a 5 objective map. So maybe I decide that Relentless Assault is not going to be super easy on this map, and I'll change it for Stranglehold. The other thing we want to do is look at the mission-specific secondary. So for example, on this mission, we have Direct Assault. This gives us 3 victory points at the end of our turn if we hold the center objective, or 5 if we hold the objective in our opponent's deployment zone. So what we can do is we can replace Retrieve Octarius data with Direct Assault. And now look at this. Stranglehold wants us to hold 3 objective, which would likely involve holding the middle center objective. Direct Assault wants us to hold the middle objective. And Oath of Moments gives us 2 points a turn if we're within 6 inches of the center. So now I'm doing something even better. I'm feeding 3 birds with 1 scone. and I think you'll see this is a very popular combination of secondaries for any Space Marine on this map. So let's say you walk up to your next match, and you see that it is this map. So immediately, I'm thinking that secondaries, like Stranglehold, are going to be a little worse on this map. But secondaries like Raise the Banners High are going to be better on this map. Now let's also imagine you're playing against some Grognard who hasn't outlived his Flames of War days and places all of these vehicles on the board. So what I'd like you to do is post what faction you play and what secondaries you would choose on this map against this specific army. Or you can come to our Discord and do the same thing. What I'd like to do is create an environment where we can all help each other improve on Warhammer 40k, and the best way to do that is leveraging expertise of others and talking about problem sets. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I also hope you have a wonderful day.